That pretty much brings us to the conclusion of day one. Now, just in terms, we've got one more thing to do. I'm hungry, you see. No, that's not true. Going to invite our next brave idea speaker, Sam Stubbs, to come up and talk about, do companies love their shareholders more than they love their communities? Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sister.
Kia ora. I'm Sam from Simplicity. I wanted to specifically acknowledge Stephen, who has just joined the Simplicity Charitable Trust as its patron. And I cannot tell you, folks, how wonderful it is when your inspiration and your hero joins your quest. So thank you very much for joining us, Stephen. We wanted to just for those of you who don't know what Simplicity is, we're a non-profit KiwiSaver manager. We also do other investment funds as well. And we set ourselves up specifically to achieve a couple of things. Well, really one thing, which is to give Kiwis dignity in retirement. And how you give people dignity is you give them choices. And how you give people choices is you give them more money. So more money equals choices, and more choices equals dignity. The other way of putting that is that poverty really sucks. And so we're about trying to eliminate poverty and give people dignity. So what we do is lowest cost financial services. So we run ourselves as a non-profit, and we give 15% of our fees to charity. And in 2 years, that's now running at almost $400,000 a year. So it's going really well. But we specifically, we were interested in this issue of corporate philanthropy in New Zealand for two reasons. One is because we are a charity and we care about it generally. But secondly, also, as a KiwiSaver manager, we invest in the top 49 companies in New Zealand. We don't invest in Sky City because we're an ethical investor, and there's a whole lot of sectors that we won't invest in. But as a investor in these companies, we also thought, listen, these companies have a choice to pay us, our KiwiSaver members, in the form of dividends or give more to charity. And so what we wanted to ask was, the very simple question was, if you give more, do you actually make more? So is giving money at a corporate sense a smart business strategy? Does it lead to higher shareholder returns? And so we've done a report. You can find it on our website, simplicity.kiwi. It's been released to the media today, and it looks at, I think it's the first survey of corporate philanthropy in New Zealand for a very, very long time. We spent a long time doing it. So we're going to answer that question. So just look at the background. New Zealanders actually are very, very generous people. If you look at this well-respected survey by CAF, New Zealanders are considered to be about the third most generous people in the world, and that's a survey over the last 5 years. So individually, there is no question that we like to give a lot. But how does that work out at the corporate level? Because we know that in some countries like the United States or the UK, big corporations actually give a reasonable amount to charity. It's linked to, I think, the inequality that there has been in society. It is part of the cultural heritage of those countries that companies give more money. So is it replicated in New Zealand? Well, here's what we found. I don't know if you can see if that's in focus, but on the left-hand side, you can see in the UK, they give about 1.7% of their pre-tax profits. This is large companies in the UK to charity. In the United States, it's about 1%. In Australia, it's about 0.6%. And in New Zealand, over on the right-hand side, it's 0.07%. So we have an incredibly low level of corporate giving in New Zealand. And if you look at that by company, it's actually really interesting. Not all of these things are listed in this thing here, but you can see that the most generous corporate donor in New Zealand gives $2.3 million. Now, do not be fooled by the accounts, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of companies will tell you they have donations and sponsorship, but a donation is not a sponsorship. So, for example, one of the very large banks in this country gives $15 million supposedly, but actually $14.3 million goes into sports and cultural sponsorships. Actually, only $600,000 goes to genuine charity. And I think this is a somewhat misleading chart because it shows, for example, that Spark is the most generous, and it goes all the way down to some companies that give nothing, and lots of companies do give nothing at all to charity. The most important thing is what percentage do they give of their pre-tax profit. So who are the most generous companies in New Zealand relative to the amount of money they make? And as you can see there on the left-hand side, it's Trustpower, Mainfreight, Spark, Freightways, Sanford, Z Energy. There's a bit of a theme there. The very New Zealand owned and the very New Zealand identifying companies tend to be the most generous in their own markets. And I want to just qualify this number a bit, because you'll see examples. One example would be Vista, which is actually quite generous, but is actually way more generous when you consider what the founders of the company have done in terms of actually setting up their own foundations and giving. So this is purely at the corporate level, but sometimes you can get founders doing amazing things like this esteemed gentleman on my right-hand side. So, but you have there an example of huge variation in what companies give. The interesting thing is that why do they give so little in New Zealand? Well, we did a lot of statistical analysis. We have a research team at Simplicity that researches issues that are of relevance to ordinary New Zealanders. One of them is philanthropy. And so we did it, what we worked out was what we call the correlation coefficient. So how much does giving $1 of charity do for your profits? And I won't go into the maths of it, but basically almost nothing. There is a very weak relationship between philanthropy and what's effectively customer loyalty and customers choosing your products. And so that's why we think companies don't give very much. Not only is there not a history of it happening in New Zealand, but also, I think also because we have what we perceive to be a quite well-developed welfare state. The perception is that there is not a massive disparity between the poor and the rich in New Zealand, although that is clearly widening. So our culture has developed in the expectation of individual philanthropy, but not corporate philanthropy. I would single out one group, which I think, I didn't really want to mention specific companies, but I find the attitude of the Australian banks in New Zealand quite interesting. If you look at what the 4 Australian-owned banks here, and I do notice that none of them were sponsors of this conference day, and they're the 4 most profitable companies in New Zealand, not a dollar from any of them. But if you look at what they give in donations in New Zealand, it's around about $5 million. Well, if you actually if you took what they give in Australia versus what they give in New Zealand, it should be more like $45 million if they gave, on a per capita basis. And what's interesting about that is those banks make 20% more out of New Zealanders than they do out of the equivalent Australians. So they make a whole lot more from us, but they give a whole lot less. And so there really is no correlation. They probably adopted this theory, right? There's no correlation between giving and making more money. And what's really interesting is if you have a look at a really developed market like the United States, what you actually notice is that the companies that are most generous are the ones that are most exposed to bad public opinion. So the energy companies, particularly in the United States, particularly companies like coal companies, oil companies, have been very generous donors to create this, make us feel good. I don't know what you would call it, charity washing, kindness washing, something. And the interesting thing is that the lowest donations in the United States come from tech companies. And I couldn't help sticking a picture of Mark Zuckerberg up there because I'm going to predict that Facebook are going to give a whole lot more money to charity in the next few years. But there is hope. Because even though there's no direct correlation between profit and philanthropy, there is an absolute correlation between engaged employees and profitability. There is a huge body of research now, and we looked into a lot of it, which actually shows that the more engaged your employees are, the more money you will make. And the correlation is almost one-to-one. If your employees are 1% more engaged, you will make 1% more profit. That is why HR departments in almost every company in New Zealand now, when we go in and talk to them, are all talking about wellness, satisfied employees, because they know that happy employees make them more money. They're not dumb, they're in the business of making money. They've actually worked out that happy employees are great to have. And also the young employees have an increasing expectation that the place that they will work for has to have purpose. It has to give back to its community. It has to play a vital part in the role of the place that it operates from. And also there's consumer awareness growing. My daughter is one of many New Zealanders who are so much more conscious about how they spend their money than I was when I was her age. So there is an increasing correlation there, and that's really important. The other thing too is tax. The bottom line is if you're a company in New Zealand and you give away $1, you can get a 28% tax credit. But if you're an individual, you can get a 33% tax credit. So the companies are not as incentivized as the individuals are in terms of giving money. Tax really matters. When you look at this globally, though, tax is a very confusing subject, and boy, I'm not going to rain on your parade by talking about tax, particularly at the end of the day, but it's very, very hard to draw a correlation between tax policies and how much is actually given globally. So, will corporate New Zealand change? Well, you know what? I think they already are. And I don't think you've seen it dramatically, but like a lot of things, it will come as a rising tide, not as a tidal wave of change. Because what you've seen is this increasing focus on wellness in the workplace. You've seen social enterprises now starting to nip at the heels in a lot of industries and start to create a competitive tension that requires for-profit companies to think, how do we retain our customers and get more customers? Because these social enterprises are really starting to annoy us by taking our customers. The other thing too is if you think about a great company, it really only has three things. As an investor, we only look for three things in a company. It's a great idea, it's money, and it's people. Well, great ideas are everywhere, folks. If you've got a phone here, you've got almost every idea in the world. There are very few new ideas. Great ideas are very common now. Money is increasingly becoming available as New Zealand becomes capital rich. In the next 10 years, KiwiSaver managers will invest about another $75 billion in the New Zealand economy. We're going to go through a renaissance of economic growth. It'll be a rising tide, you won't notice it, but every single day things will get a little bit better than they were. Markets will go up or down, but overall things will improve. But it's always about the people. The people are always the things that make great ideas and money. And fighting for people, getting talent on board, retaining talent is increasingly difficult. So companies are going to spend more on making themselves look good to potential and current employees, and philanthropy is one of those areas where they can. So do not ignore the possibility of corporate philanthropy if you are seeking gifts. So, and I just wanted to use one example maybe of this already happening, which is ourselves. So look for an example. We are the fastest growing KiwiSaver manager, 24,000 clients, $800 million in 2 years. How do we do that? Well, actually, when we poll our members, 70% of them join us because we're going to make them more money because we have the lowest fees, and we can demonstrably show them that they'll be about $65,000 richer when they retire. But 30% of the members join us for non-monetary reasons, because we give 15% of our fees to charity, because we're Kiwi-owned, because we're an ethical investor, and because we're a shareholder activist. So if you look at it from a purely business point of view, from our point of view, philanthropy makes really good business sense. And we believe that a growing number of New Zealand companies will start to feel that way as they want to retain their staff. So it's not great news, folks. There's not a lot of money coming in, but I think the tides of change are very positive. Thank you.
Again, Sam, I have some words of gratitude and a gift for you to give to others. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was a great presentation, and thank you very much. Well done, everybody. We have now finally arrived at the end of day one, and I'm sure, like me, you'll appreciate all of the knowledge and the learning experience that we have engaged in. I have a few quick announcements to make sure that we exit this space well. Firstly, there have been a couple of social media tweets made about Sir Stephen's presentation. Can we ask for those to be taken down, as we specifically requested that there would be no social media posts made about Sir Stephen's talk. So thank you for cooperating with us for that. Tonight's reception at Parliament is relatively formally informal. So don't feel like you have to get dressed in any additional clothing. Well, hold on, I need to reframe all of this. So tidy casual is the clothing expectation for tonight at Parliament, and it's not a meal, it's a cocktail evening with canapes. So you might just want to grab a bite to eat on your way to Parliament, and there's a map that's coming up on the projector. If you don't know where it is, there's Uber, there's taxis, and there's others that you can follow. Don't forget to collect your baggage, and for that person who left a cell phone, I'll have it with me until tomorrow morning when it's at reception. And there's also, for those of you who have not been to Parliament before, there is a detector, luggage detector, so if you don't want long queues, just leave your baggage at the door. Leave your baggage at home, and so that you can go through and it will speed the process of getting back into Parliament. Thank you very much, everybody, for your generosity of patience and kindness and tolerance with each other, and your openness to learn and take on board new thinking to support you in the work that you're doing back in your respective communities. Tūturu whakamaua kia tīna, haumie hui e, kia ora tātou.